Harihi Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastoma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shrivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. So continuing with the Mahabharata, chapter 2, Pandu cursed and blessed. Although he possessed all material opulence, Pandu was by nature disinterested in sensual pleasure. After enjoying with his wives for only a short while, his mind turned to the more important matters. Although the Kuru dynasty had for many thousands of years been emperors of the globe and had upheld religious codes, their hold over kings had begun to slip with the death of Shantanu and his 2 sons. Some of the kings had become arrogant, exceeding their own boundaries and agonizing weaker kings. Okay, so, according to Manu, then that's the only condition for actually war, is that when you see other kings, rather than just sticking to the point of protecting their citizens, protecting their kingdom, they extend themselves and they try to, bother the kingdoms next to them. And so that will jeopardize how that one particular king can maintain his citizens. So that may be a case for fighting. But otherwise, just because you want to become, have a bigger kingdom or that, like we see Duryodhana and that's not actually a case for fighting. That's not proper. So we see here is that he's seeing that kings with Shantanu not being there and not having had a strong king in place for a long time, that Pandu then was thinking that something has to be done to bring control back to the kingdom, that the kings will do their duties properly, one king will respect another, and everything will be balanced and peaceful, because only in time of peace is there prosperity, right? Because the general public, you're protecting them, right? During war, maybe some rich people will make money, but during peace, then everybody does well. Pandu felt impelled to take action. Going before Bhishma, he said, "My lord, our dynasty's greatness has suffered diminution. The world is straying from the path of righteousness established by our ancestors. Irreligion is rising. It is my duty to our noble house, and indeed to the Supreme Lord himself, to go out and check the offenders." Because the idea is people should be Krishna conscious. If there's peace, they can be Krishna. Then it's much easier for them to go about their duties. They'll be Krishna conscious. Things will go very pleasantly. So for Pandu, he's seeing it as service to the Lord to actually run things nicely and establish things nicely. Bhishma smiled. Here indeed was a worthy descendant of the great Bharata, after whom the very earth had been named. He replied, "Your desire benefits our line and is praiseworthy in every way. Take blessings from the Brahmanas and leave with an army. May victory attend you." So in their line, descendants of Bharata, then Bharatvarsha is then established, has the name based on his position, how glorious he was, how well he protected the earth. So then Pandu's point is that is the glory of our line, our dynasty, so we have to live up to that. Right now the earth is not being protected, we have to do that. Right? So that sense of duty and then performing that duty to please Krishna, then we see that's the standard. Pandu quickly assembled a vast force consisting of infantry, horsemen, elephants, and chariots. Right? Because these are the 4 aspects of the army. You always have these 4. The infantry, horsemen, elephants, chariots. We see also that's anytime there's an arrangement, akshauhini, it's always by the number, the proportion there. We even see in this game of chess, like that, it's based on these. The bishops are the chariots, the castles are the elephants, The horse is the cavalry, and then the pawns in the front is the infantry. So it's based on the same principle. That's why you say it's the bishop, but why does the bishop have to go at an angle, a diagonal? Right? Because if a chariot moves, if he's going straight at you, that's not the best way to be able to fight. Right? Because you go at an angle. And from that, then you can shoot out the side. That's the whole place. Does that make sense? Yeah. As he left Hastinapur, he looked like the king of the gods, surrounded by his celestial army. Pandu marched to the east and defeated the king of Dasarhas, who was becoming averse to Hastinapur's rule. Moving south towards Magadha, where the powerful king Dirgha was assailing many surrounding countries, Pandu attacked the proud king at his capital, Rajgiriha, and killed him. After that, Pandu subjugated several other warlike kings. So they go there, they kill the king, but the point is, as we said, it's about maintaining the public and protecting the public. That means he has to now establish a proper king there, not that just he becomes the king, because how much can he manage? So the point is he may be the emperor to see that all other kings are doing their duties, but the king runs his own kingdom. So therefore, in this case, generally speaking, it would be if his son is properly trained, his son now would be established on the throne. So then Pandu himself would establish him, do all the different things. So then he has that kind of allegiance. That if not, he'll discuss with the ministers there and establish someone there. If they don't have someone then from his own kingdom, then he'll bring someone and they'll run. But it's not a matter of you just go in and destroy and then move on. It's a matter of you go in, you have the battle, then you establish the authority, then the people are protected. So you don't go in and steal everything like that. After that, Pandu subjugated several other warlike kings. He ranged across the globe like a fire, his far-reaching arrows and the splendor of his weapons resembling brilliant flames. As his fame spread, monarchs submitted without resistance. Right? So people here, kings have their people out. That's their business to know what's going on. They have their spies, they have their informants, they have just people properly going and visiting other kingdoms. And so the word gets out that he's going and establishing, law and order. So then as he goes, first we see the first kings fight, but after this, then we see the kings don't fight. They just know, yes, and they accept the rule. Because before that, they accepted Shantanu's rule and like this. So now again. Soon the entire world's kings recognized him as the most powerful ruler on earth. They bowed to him with joined palms and offered tribute of various kinds. Right? After this 1-year campaign, Pandu returned to his capital with the wealth he had obtained. All the Kurus with Bhishma at their head came out to greet him. They viewed with delight the train of elephants, oxen, camels, horses, and chariots, all laden with riches and stretching farther than the eye could see. Right? So all these elephants, oxen, camels, horses, chariots, they're all bringing all this wealth. So as he's going, he's collecting tribute. So he's not going in and ransacking the place and stealing stuff. They're coming out and giving him tribute. Like that. And so then they have that, then they can do things with that. They can take care, they can rule, they can see, they can go out. Like when the kingdom has a problem, they go with their army and take care of it. They pay for it, not the local king. Pandu presented to the Kuru elders precious stones, pearls, gold, coral, and silver piled in heaps, along with millions of cows, horses, and other animals. He showed them innumerable costly blankets, rugs, and skins from the rare black Renku deer. So all these nice things, and he would have arranged them nicely. All these things, the cows, then now they can give in charity. Like you see, Krishna every day would give so many thousands of cows in charity. So this way they could just maintain and do all these nice things. So it's not that they get these things and hoard them. Then things that they require they keep, and others are given in charity, because they're always rewarding the Brahmins, or doing different things, or performing sacrifices, so all these things will be used. Pandu bowed at Bhishma's feet as he presented all this wealth, and Bhishma tearfully embraced the young king. Surrounded by Brahmins uttering prayers and benedictions, The two men then mounted a golden chariot and proceeded to the royal palace, heralded by a fanfare of trumpeters, conches, and kettle drums. Pandu ensured that his two brothers were each given much wealth. He had little personal interest in wealth, being more attracted to forests and plains than luxurious palace life. Right? So whatever's required for the king, managing the kingdom and all that, that's there. But his own personal, he wasn't attracted much like that. He had grown up in the forest. He liked the forest. It's like the Pandavas. You see, they grew up in the forest, and so they preferred the forest. But, to run a kingdom, then it's advantageous to be in the kingdom, be in a palace and be in the city. So they would do that. But otherwise, he himself was not. But he arranged that his brothers were, had nice facilities and everything like that. So that means Dhritarashtra and Vidura. He loved to mount his stallion and ride out on long hunting expeditions. A few months after returning to Hastinapur, he decided to make his permanent residence in a forest among the Himalayan mountains, taking his two wives with him. He left his magnificent palace and moved to a simple dwelling on the mountainside. The local people would see the monarch roaming the woods with his wives. Encased in beautiful blazing armor and armed with bows and swords, he resembled a god wandering on earth. Right? So then many times we see out in the forest, then in the Himalayas, the demigods would come down with their wives. They'd be moving around, and they would have all their celestial outfit and armor on and moving. So then those who were living in the forest, then it looked to them like the demigods were there. So it was Pandu and his two wives. Dhritarashtra officiated as the king in Hastinapur on behalf of his younger brother. At his command, the forest people would supply Pandu with every object of enjoyment. Pandu had mastered his senses, so although he gracefully accepted their gifts, he continued to live simply. Right? So they offer him, he would take them. He wouldn't say, "Oh no, I'm living simply, I want like that." He would accept them, and then he would use them for guests and other things like that and giving. But he would still continue to live simply. But the reciprocation, the dealings were very, very pleasant. Because the idea is that if the senses are actually controlled and you have no material desire, then you don't need anything. And you also don't need to reject anything, because you have no need. So nothing is what you want or what you don't want, because what you don't want, it's the opposite of what you want. Right? So therefore, then you see persons like this, people come and bring them things, then they accept them. Because then the relationship. But then afterwards, they'll give them to someone who can actually properly use it. Some Brahmin, some other sage, some like this and that. Some guest comes, they feed them, they give them gifts. So Dhritarashtra, because he's taking care, then Dhritarashtra, told that the people living in that region should, take care of Pandu. One day, Pandu went out hunting. He saw a couple of large deer mating. They bolted when they saw the king, right? Because the king means he's out there with his weapons and all that. But he quickly fired 5 swift arrows after him. As the golden feather shafts pierced the male deer, it fell down crying. To the king's surprise, the dying deer began to speak in a pained voice, right? Because deers generally don't talk, right? This one talked. "Oh, how shameful." This is the deer speaking. "Even degraded men who are slaves to their senses never act so cruelly. No man's judgment can ever prevail against scriptural ordinance. How then have you, the king and a descendant of the noble Bharat race, acted in this way, so in conflict with Vedic direction?" Right, so that's why you see is that, let's say we're fighting is there, you're on a battlefield. And on the battlefield, then everybody's ready. It's all done properly, so it's equal. Then you see the Pandavas are there, the Kauravas are there. The conches are blown, everything's ready. Then they start the battle like that. In the evening, the conch is blown, they stop the battle. So everything's done because it's about relationship. It's not just about winning. Like Duryodhana, it's about winning. But for the others, it's not actually about winning. Means winning happens in the process. But it's about maintaining the proper relationships with the citizens, the state, with the other great warriors and everything. That's why you would see that they would, in the evening, then they would go to each other's camp and, sit and eat and do all these different things. So therefore, if someone is sleeping, you don't fight with them. They're eating their lunch, you don't fight with them. So you see so many times these modern things, someone's eating, so he's compromised, then they come in and try to kill them or something. So that's what the deer is talking about, right? So the deer is spending that time intimately with his wife, and so that's not the time you come and attack. The deer's on their own, they're moving about, they're grazing, they're running. That's the time, because then the deer's ready to run. But when they're spending time together, then that's not the time. Pāṇḍa stood before the deer, which was weeping bitterly, and replied, "As a king, it is my duty to hunt." Right? So he's pointing out, I hunt. I must control the forest, making it safe for the rishis. At the same time, I am able to practice the kingly art of weaponry. Right? So there's too many animals, this and that, they create problems. So he then controls what's in the forest, because it's not just deer. So it'll also be the tigers, the lions, the wild boars, and these things like that can really make trouble. And so then, but at the same time, he gets to practice his fighting art. So both things could happen. And he's saying it's according to Shastra, which it is. But at the same time, what the Rishi said, the deer is saying, is also according to Manu, is that you don't bother somebody when, the senses are engaged and they're absorbed like that, because then they will not be ready for any other interaction. Why, even great sages in the past have killed deer in the forest by offering them in sacrifice. Oh dear, why then do you reprove me? So the other aspect, they've killed the deer, but then when the deer is offered in sacrifice, then the deer is liberated from the deer position, and they're elevated to the human birth, or even farther up to the heavenly planets. So everyone's benefited in this way, because if you ask, oh, the deer are so nice, what are they doing? But then they get this benefit. So the point about the deer is they're very quick. And they don't run like other animals. Other animals will generally run kind of in a straight line, a little bit this way, that. But deer have this ability, they can run and change directions just immediately, like in English we'll say on a dime. A dime is very small, so it's just immediately they can change course. So that's the uniqueness of them. That's why it's so hard to catch them. A lion or tiger wants to catch them. Then they can outmaneuver them. They can't necessarily outrun them, but they can outmaneuver them. So that's why then they're also part of what is being hunted. The deer replied that it did not condemn Pāṇḍa for injuring it, but not taking into consideration that it was mating. The animal then told Pāṇḍa that it was a rishi named Kindama. He had assumed the form of a deer because he had no dwelling place and could not unite publicly with his wife in a human form. Right? Because humans, they spend their time intimately inside and all that. But he had no place. They were so poor. So then they decided to take the form of a deer. He had therefore transformed himself and his wife into deer. The king had killed him just as he was trying to beget a child. Kindama continued, "No creature should be attacked at that moment. Your act was cruel and sinful and is liable to lead you to hell. It is especially reproachful as you are a king and are meant to chastise the wicked and protect the tenets of religion." Right? So they'll make mistakes because of this element of passion, but it doesn't mean that it's not corrected or not pointed out. Because if it's not pointed out like this, then others won't take it seriously. That's why there's always a proper example. Pāṇḍa gazed at Kindama in shocked silence. The sage has spoken correctly. It has certainly been sinful to shoot a deer at this time. How had he allowed himself to be so overcome with passion? Because they get into this mood of fighting and all that, and they just see that part of the Shastra, which is correct. But you also have to see the complete circumstance like that, because he wasn't taking into consideration the environment in which it was going on. Right? Because you have the time, you have the place, and then the circumstance. The time is, time meaning, what time of the day it is, or what season, or what's the occasion, like this. The place will be then what is the environment and what it's actually suitable for, right? So you have the time and its suitableness, the place its suitableness. The circumstances means the ingredients, right? So that will mean the king, that will mean these deers, it'll mean, his chariot, his arrows, whatever is going on there then in this. But so he considered himself and the forest and all that aspect of the circumstance, but he didn't properly consider the circumstance of the deer. So he didn't see that they were unsuitable for his hunting. like that. So that was a mistake on his part. Though the part that he mentioned about the kings, they hunt, and the sages approve of that, then that's shastric. But he's pointed out here is that he wasn't complete. And so being the king, he has to see completely. Otherwise the common person, well, Pūrṇa did. What's the big deal? And what would come from having killed a rishi? This was a calamity, right? Because shooting a deer, that's one thing, because that's all that. But shooting a rishi, that's not very authorized. The king gazed downward and sunk in shame and regret. Seeing Pandu's crestfallen condition, Kindama said, "You need not fear the sin of killing a Brahmin, as you did not know my true identity. But as you have killed me when I was indulging in pleasure, so too shall you meet your death at such a time." Right? So just as the king was trying to beget a child with his wife, it means this rishi, if the king ever tries the same thing, he will also die. The rishi wanted to free Pandu from his sin. Right? Because he's the king, he didn't know, like that. But at the same time, he wouldn't have been worried because he's considering the situation. The king would consider that. So they consider themselves safe. So all the thing they'd have to worry about is if it was a lion or a tiger. Right? By cursing the king, Kindama knew that Pandu would immediately receive the reaction for his misdeed, and thus not have to suffer after death. Right? Because otherwise then it'll go on. So then he's punishing him in this way, so then it's cleared. Then next life will be free. Struggling to speak as his life blood ebbed away, Kindama uttered his fearful imprecation. When next you approach your wife out of desire, you will immediately fall dead. O king, as I was plunged into grief when I was happy, you shall also meet with grief at such a time. The deer then gave up its life. Pandu stood for some moments, unable to move. As he gazed at the deer's dead body, hot tears ran down his cheeks. Gathering his wits, he returned to his hut. He immediately told his wives what had happened. Afflicted by sorrow, the king cried aloud with his two queens. He condemned himself again and again, holding his head and lamenting. Pandu spoke in an anguished voice. I have heard that my father, although born of a virtuous man, was himself a slave of lust, and died as a result. Having been begotten in the wife of a lustful king, I too have become afflicted with lust. I have become devoted to sin. My life is simply spent in killing innocent creatures. Because they are what's his name? Their father. But he had also, because we see Pandu had spent some time. You mentioned here, a short while. After getting married, spend that time with the wives, get to know each other like this. So his father continued for a long time. So that's why then he had died, because he just spent all his time with his wives and all that. He didn't actually get so much into his duties. He left the king, the ministers and that to run everything. So he's saying, I'm the son of such a person. So one could say is no, but Vyasadeva, begot him and his brothers on his father's wives. Who in other words, Vyasadeva and is the brother, right? So therefore, then say this would be in previous ages. It was something that was allowed. Like if the husband died and there was no child, then the brother of the husband could beget children on the wife. But it's not allowed in the Kali Yuga, because then one has to be very, very sober, or very detached. And it's not really a nice thing anyway, but in the other ages it can be used. It's not a standard thing. So he's pointing out as so one could say is no, but Vyasadeva with his father, but actually not, because whoever his father, that's the line he's coming in. That's the nature he'll have. Right? Because the arrangement, it's not based as much on the body, it's based on the nature of the living entity. And then that living entity is given that body. Does that make sense? So the mentality and that match. So the material energy will arrange it. So what is he saying here? I too have become afflicted with lust. I have become devoted to sin. My life is simply spent in killing innocent creatures. The gods have forsaken me, and I stand cursed. Pandu resolved to live a life of austerity. He declared, because otherwise, for the kings, then they're going to be living a grihastha life and everything like that. But now is that because he can't actually have children and all that, and because of how it came about is by killing a sage, then he just wanted to move on to vanaprastha, like that. That was his idea. He declared that from that moment he would accept a vow of celibacy, as Bhishma had done. He would seek salvation by renouncing all pleasure, the great impediment to spiritual understanding. So Pandu makes the point, the gods have forsaken me, and I stand cursed. Pandu resolved to live a life of austerity. He declared that from that moment he would accept a vow of celibacy, as Bhishma had done. He would seek salvation by renouncing all sensual pleasure, the great impediment to spiritual understanding. Pandu spoke to his horrified wives, I shall shave my head and cover my body with dust. Sorrow and joy will be equal to me, right? Because otherwise in Grihastha ashram, when there's happiness, then everybody's happy. When there's sorrow, then there's that. But when you're on this point of it doesn't matter if it's a nice situation, not nice, you're balanced, like that. That's the whole point of vanaprastha, is to become indifferent to the situation that's there, right? But sometimes it's taken, So you're renounced from engaging the senses pleasurably, but you're not disturbed by the senses not being engaged. So you're trying to get to this balance. So it'll be a little bit, effort. So it's different from the sannyasa ashram, which is just, you don't get involved in sense gratification. You're engaged in all these positive activities. The vanaprastha is more focusing on pulling out from the grihastha ashram. So there'll be an emphasis on not engaging the senses. So that's what he's talking about. So that's why you see his horrified wives. Right? I will entirely renounce anger and devote myself to the good of all creatures. Right? So that good is, dealing with them, seeing them all in context of Krishna. I will accept no gifts and attain my food by begging. In this way, I shall transcend the dualities of this world and rise to the highest regions where the Lord himself resides. Right? So by giving up that material consciousness, then you're able to situate yourself and always see Krishna in everything. That's what you're trying to get to, is that how everything's connected to Krishna and how I and my situation are connected to Krishna. So not being distracted by sense pleasure, position, authority, wealth, riches, all these different things. So that's what he's saying, is that what you normally do, what devotees would be trying to do all the way through, and then externally they do at the end of their life, he's going to externally do that now. The king asked his wives to return to the capital and inform his elders of the turn of events. They should gratify the Brahmins on his behalf, giving them much wealth, because then that benefit is there for him and is for his wives. And then that will just make everything go much nicer, be able to be more absorbed in Krishna consciousness. For his part, he would immediately retire into the wilderness and leave society forever. Kunti and Madri were torn by grief. They could not face the prospect of separation from their husband. In piteous voices, they begged that he allow them to follow his path, right? Because vanaprastha can be sapatni or without his wife. So he can go alone into the forest, or he can go with his wives. So we see many, it's either way. Like Dhritarashtra went with his wife, Kunti also went along went there, Vidura went. So it's just a matter of if they're all comfortable with that kind of lifestyle. Now, if they would feel uncomfortable with that, them going back to the palace, that's also a standard part of vanaprastha. They become recluses in the palace. And the husband is a recluse in the forest. But if they like, they can also, if they're comfortable, they go with the husband to the forest. So then it's a matter of, he's thinking that naturally they, as young princesses, that they'll be more comfortable in the palace, with family and everything and all facility. And he'll go out to the forest. But they're pointing out, no, they'd rather be in the forest with him. Right? They're living in the forest now, so they don't have a problem. Both queens were prepared to accept whatever austerities he accepted, right? Because whatever he's doing, that's what they would do. Like they only live by begging, then that's how it works. They live in a little hut, then that's what they're in. Or they're at the point where they're not living in a hut, they're just living under a tree, they're willing to do that. On behalf of both of them, Kunti said, "Let us together accept the order of Vanaprastha, retirement in the forest. We shall be happy practicing asceticism with you. If you leave us today, we shall not bear our lives any longer." Seeing their distressed condition, Pandu relented, but he made it clear that he intended to perform the strictest austerities. His wives were not deterred. They wished only to be with him wherever he went. Pandu resolved to embark on his ascetic life immediately. He would not return to the city. He removed all his royal ornaments and gave them, along with his riches, to the forest Brahmins. Then he said to his attendants, "Go back to Hastinapur and inform Bhishma of everything that has occurred." Right? So he was in the forest as the king. He preferred to live there and all that. And so managing on hand, and Dhritarashtra was doing. But he was still there, and he had all his weaponry. He was still a king, how he'd deal. His duties were that of a king. So he'd be giving charity to the Brahmins, doing all these things. So he had his attendants. They would take care of things. They would arrange things and all that. But now, with this, then they're all going back, so it'll just be Pandu and his wives. Because Vanaprastha, there's no attendance like that. Other members of the family want to come and take part, that's okay, but there's no attendance as such that you're taking care of and paying and all these things. He then said to his attendants, "Go back to Hastinapur and inform Bhishma of everything that has occurred." The royal attendants, accompanied by the Brahmanas, left sorrowfully for Hastinapur. The citizens lamented loudly when they heard of Pandu's plight. Dhritarashtra was especially afflicted. Thinking of Pandu living so austerely in the forest, he could no longer derive pleasure from the comforts of his bed, servants, and royal opulence. Right? Because he's thinking, Pandu's arranged this, he's living very comfortably, and he's very happy. And Pandu, even though he may not be living so comfortably, he's in the forest, that's where he'd like to be, so it's comfortable for him. So he's comfortable, Dhritarashtra's comfortable, they're all happy. But now that he's going to go into Vanaprastha and just be austere, then it's very hard for him to enjoy the pleasures of the palace. He continually wept and brooded over Pandu. Om Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jai Srila Prabhupada ki.